got the floor, discussion of facilitators and so on.
So, I mean, not a lot's happened since some previous iteration of this group has met, but I thought it makes sense to give folks an update on what we're thinking about. So there's this tension between hiring a consultant and a facilitator, and could we find the right person who could do both roles, or do we need one to do the softer people part and somebody else to do the technical side? It looks like there are 3 or 4 groups who are out there who could help us on the technical side. Those would include Jake if he has the time, and he may not have the time. And I started a conversation with him, but he'd like us to put together some sort of proposal that he could respond to. So he's one. There's Glenn Kuchar, the executive director of MASC. I think when this part of this group met with him before, there was a general consensus that we preferred him to the next alternative just because he was more engaging. And then there's the other group, which is MARS, which is the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, and they're very technically proficient, but almost certainly couldn't facilitate us out of our challenges, right? But one could envision a situation where either Jake or Glenn did something, or then the third group is the district management group, but then they might actually bring in Mars to do some highly technical consulting around specific things.
Peter, let me ask you a question.
Well,
These things are, so you have to be prioritized somehow in terms of what makes you want, if you want to try and handle both. But I've been through dozens of mergers, acquisitions, combinations. The list of questions that I would need, not even dealing with the education side, which I'm not qualified to look at, just the business side. My question immediately is, how much time do the 2 district business offices have to pump data to the people who will want to see it?
well, the really nice thing, I mean, clearly not enough time, right? I mean, just this last week, I've spent all my time.
With me right now, an old acquisition guidebook, which has over 200 questions.
Right. Yeah, so we don't.
Which, if I'm conducting due diligence as a member of the finance committee for my town, I'm gonna want answers to those.
Right. So I mean, I think there's 3 things that are. We don't have enough time, right? All my time right now is terribly sucked into this coronavirus thing, and like it sounds like.
Which is no laughing matter.
No, I know, but it's just on and on and on constantly. So there's that going on. So we are pressed a little bit for time. A couple neat things. Some really bright people at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed put together complex interactive database that lets us do some of that work, right? So it's only as good as the data that's in there, but all our data is uploaded to the state, and it lets us manipulate and ask a lot of questions without going back, like without having to, any one of us could sit down and maybe not get all 200 of your questions answered, but get 150 of them answered by working through that database. So that's a really good thing. The other thing would be having the consultant or some consultants drive that work, as opposed to me just give it, like, my business administrator is just one person, right? And she's trying to get, I mean, the Berkshire Hills budget's done, but we're still working on Richmond and Hancock and New Ashford. You guys are right in the middle of your budget process. It's like the single worst time of year to get a business administrator distracted on this. But a consultant, I think, could work alongside a business administrator and that database and get enough done so that we could move forward. Maybe not answer all your questions, but
Yeah, well, the only red flag that sends up right away is, having gone through this, the consultant sometimes puts more pressure on your business manager than you think you would if you didn't have the consultant.
no, maybe.
So you need to be thinking about what consultant and what kind of capacity they have to just kind of
So going back, so there's Jake, there's Mask, there's Mars, there's the district management group, which is a group out of sort of the north of Boston that has a very good reputation, a lot of retired DESI people, but they have a good reputation for doing thoughtful work. We worked with them separately on a data project, and they were bright and very helpful. And there's the public consulting group, and I'm not as familiar with them. They're sort of a national and international group. And then on the pure facilitator side, there's probably half a dozen people that are local that are known to us, and any one of them I think could be beneficial.
Is there a chance that a facilitator might do work pro bono?
It doesn't hurt to ask.
Well, I think some would, but also I think who knows, right? And we could map out a scope for this, but just say we wanted a facilitator to come and help us with 10 meetings and then prepare for those meetings in advance and do some work afterwards. With the rare exception of somebody like Roger, who did it for us for a while, I think the likelihood of finding somebody to do it for free is small, and we might also get what you pay for, right? So if we invest the money in somebody, then it'll be their top priority and it'll really help us. And for the moment, we've got a $50,000 check burning a hole in our pocket, and we got to spend it by the end of June anyway. We might be able to, and you know this better than I, we might be able to encumber it and drag the work out a little bit longer. But
You could do that in a minute with a good consulting firm.
right.
A letter of commitment and your $50,000 is gone.
Peter?
Yeah. So that's really all I got to say on that.
As you list off the options for consultants, Peter, and we just heard from Jake and the work that's underway for the task force, and it seems like they are going to be asking and answering many of the same questions that we're going to be asking and answering in a smaller geography. Are there any political considerations you have as we think about consultants and deliberately thinking about how we can sync this work together through perhaps hiring Jake? I should disclose that Jake doesn't work for the foundation, so I know him through that.
Yeah, no, I think the world of Jake. I think he does really good work. The one headache is and he was very transparent about it, right? But the task force proposed this one district notion. A bunch of people were really grumpy about the one district notion. If you hire the guy who's the project manager for the group that proposed the one district notion, there may be some political baggage there.
Vicky?
Well, I spoke with Jake when Jane recommended that we put Jake on the agenda, and just so you know, the agenda came from all of you, not from me. When Jane recommended that I put Jake on the agenda, I sent him an email, and he asked in what role I was asking him to speak today, because he kind of gave me the indication that he may not be interested in taking on another consulting position. So I think before we put a lot of eggs in Jake's basket on that, he was happy to come here as the project manager and sort of share with us what they're doing and what monies were available, to us if we wanted to go after some of it.
And what he shared with me is he would respond to a sort of proposal for what we were looking to do, right? And I'm not ready to write that proposal.
Right.
Some set of us needs to do that.
Yes.
Having listened to 2 presentations in this group, and looking into what those people can actually do for us, I'm not in favor of either of them in a big leadership position. I think that MASC presentation was really good in terms of opening our eyes to what this is about. I don't think they have the people power to actually devote the time that we might need. I certainly would approach them. Mars track record and isn't that great. So I was really excited to hear about this district management solutions option for possibly doing the grunt work of helping getting things together. And so I personally today would not be able to make a decision about who to pick. because we really need a deep dive into getting the best quality we can get, and then it's sort of tricky who's going to, can't just keep throwing things at the superintendents to do that research because they're pretty busy with other stuff, so that's just my comment.
I have a strong feeling that we need a facilitator first. And it comes from the fact that we are all very dedicated to our districts where we work, but there clearly are going to be things that emerge about what we feel in terms of what we want as an outcome. And, oh God, I think it's mine.
I was gonna poke her because I knew it wasn't mine.
No, I wouldn't. So I really believe it's very much that horrible story of the blind man and the elephant. We're coming in here with all these different views of what we really want. And I think until we're frank and speak about it to everybody, to the group, I really believe a facilitator has to do that with us first before we go ahead and get to the technical end. And it may be that people don't want the touchy-feely part, but if we've got 4 people sitting here who say, you know, Mount Everett will never die, and 5 people saying, you know, we'll never give up a Spartan, we're not gonna get where we want. And I think the facilitator is the person we need to sort of say, okay, each of us can give up this or take this in order to start with a level playing ground. And some of us may have a very different vision about why we're here for education for South County and what we want as an outcome. But I think that has to come out on the table before moving ahead. And I think that could be done pretty quickly, but I don't think we should sit on it.
Yes, sir.
Roger Kavanaugh, for folks who don't know. This summer I had the privilege of facilitating the Southern Berkshire Education Future Group for free. And the interesting thing about the original proposal that these guys put together for the position seemed to be heavily weighted towards we wanted a facilitator. But the reality of the work that I did was the facilitator part, the herding of the cats part, I'm very good at. But what they were also looking for, and we need to be careful that we articulate this, is who's going to take action after the meeting? And I took action after the meeting. I gathered a subgroup together, and we came back with a proposal for that group. But every time we left the room, everybody went back to their roles, and the quote facilitator was the operations person outside of the group. So herding cats is a very important part, making sure people are being polite, making sure they're staying on task. But stepping out of that and moving the process along is another role. And then there's a third role that, you know, I admittedly had no qualification for, but I didn't need to, which was the technical part, because we were trying to look at a shared resource, and we actually had success. We at least came up with the idea that we could share a resource amongst the 4 districts, and there was even a way to pay for it. Now, whether that ever came to fruition, I can't say, but I think we need to be very careful about how we articulate what we want the facilitator to do, because I don't think there's one size fits all.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I'm mindful that a number of the people around the table here were not part of the presentations by MASC and MARS. And so I don't think it would be fair to call for a vote today on this. And I think we, at a minimum, need to get the information that was distributed by them around to the full group. And I'm wondering if it makes sense, because it is very hard to get the 24 of us available on a single day, to appoint a subcommittee to come back to the full committee with a recommendation on this at our next meeting, which needs to be soon, because we need to be mindful also of the deadline we have in spending this money. And so we can't wait a month, 6 weeks to make a decision on this. So, does that sound like a good idea? Are there people around the table who would be interested in being on that subcommittee to pull all this information together, get a packet to the full committee, maybe have a recommendation? I'd love it if you could be on that subcommittee because you've got experience in facilitation. And then we could be more informed when we pick up this topic next. Does that sound like a good idea to the group?
I'd just like to add that, Peter and Berkshire Taconic Foundation has access to some of the most skilled facilitators I've ever met. And I've worked with a few of them, so I would like to make sure that Peter's on that committee so that he can throw in suggestions that he knows that other people might not know.
Sure.
Okay, so who would like to be on that subcommittee?
Lucy, can I?
Yeah, go ahead,
Can I ask you a
Susan.
question? So I wasn't part of that group, I'm kind of new to this whole
Right.
thing. And I'm just confused as if we've gone from a discussion about consultants to facilitators. Or are we addressing both of those issues at this point?
Right.
I don't
Right.
know what the answer.
Yeah, good clarification. This subcommittee would be looking at both those roles and whether they are separate roles, which in my mind they are.
Yes.
Like technical consultant and then facilitator with some role of follow-up and marshaling the information and representing it, because although I can chair these meetings and certainly stay on top of all the projects, I do have a full-time job. I do manage a law firm and practice law too. So I can't make this my full-time job, unfortunately. I sort of would like to, because I think it's very important, and I think it's gonna be fascinating. But I can't. So I do need this facilitator to do some of that follow-up work with me, but do more than the traditional facilitator does, which is just to get people in the room, get them speaking honestly and openly about what they're thinking and open up their brains to think more broadly. So I think we would be looking for someone with some additional role beyond just pure facilitation. So yes, consultant plus facilitator, that would be part of the assignment to this subcommittee. And they'd have to be available to work quickly because we need to get that information to the group and make a decision pretty quickly. So with that said, who would be interested in participating on that subcommittee? Peter's already been appointed.
I would.
Okay, so we've got Peter, Jane, Bonnie, Roger, Susan.
I would be happy to, but I already feel there's too many people on the subcommittee. If you're gonna do it,
Okay,
so,
I'm sure they'd love to have you.
yeah, I'm prepared to work very quickly, like, start meeting next week.
Makes it easier for me.
All right,
Resources.
Also, I'm wondering, since Peter, or is there a link to the last process that is that represented on the committee? And Peter, it seems like you have a good handle on the options. Are you able to join this committee to help kind of bring?
it's
Yeah.
on my list.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
I also have the presentations, at least the one from Matt,
From Morris?
from Mars. They did a power. I have the PowerPoint presentation that I can forward to you, so that you at least have that as a basis.
And we can get this one that we got from MASC out.
okay. So the next topic, does anyone have a hard stop right now, just so that I'm mindful? We're at 11:22. Okay. The next topic is discussion and possible action on creating subcommittees. This was actually something I had suggested to Nadine put on the agenda. I think a lot of the work of this committee needs to be done in subcommittee and then brought to the group. I have to say, I have a very, very mixed feelings about executive committees in general. They can be good in that they allow for meetings to be held more frequently, and with smaller groups, it's easier to get everybody's views on the table. They also can have the unfortunate effect of people feeling out of the core group, right? And I've seen this a lot with nonprofits, actually. With large nonprofit boards, an executive committee is formed, and the people who aren't on the executive committee feel not as engaged as they otherwise would be if discussion is held with the full group. So I'm a little nervous about an executive committee for this group for that reason, because I think it's very important that we all feel engaged and part of every significant discussion. So if we have subcommittees that are more tailored to particular subjects, and Jake identified 3 other than the executive committee that they have, an educational quality subcommittee, a finance subcommittee, a public outreach and engagement subcommittee. I don't know if we need that public outreach and engagement subcommittee constituted right now. Maybe we do. It feels a little premature to me. And when I was looking through the guidelines, I saw topics there that seemed to me to match up with subcommittee areas like staffing and collective bargaining. To me, that's a committee unto itself. That's a huge topic that's going to require, I think, outreach to union reps and, you know, some very specific thinking and analysis that I think would naturally lend itself to a subcommittee group. But I do think we should talk, at least brainstorm what those subcommittees might be if people are in favor of subcommittees, and what people think about an executive committee, yay or nay. Yes, Jeff?
I'll just throw them out there. I think we could get to work pretty quickly on curriculum and the vision of education. One on overall finance, which I was envisioning would be like negotiations. And then if we're looking at buildings, grounds, and transportation as a separate one of large cost centers and also just assets that are available, that would feed into the financial, but we could break. I was thinking if we broke up that, we could get to work pretty quickly.
Okay, so yours were curriculum. I think that could be curriculum / educational objective, finance.
And then buildings, grounds, transportation as a third.
It's really
Buildings.
operations. It's really operations.
Operation.
Ground, transportation.
No, just call it operations.
Operations.
It's operations. That would encumber your physical plant, transportation, building structures, purchasing, et cetera.
Okay. And what do people think about having a separate one for staffing and collective
Yes.
bargaining?
That was what I was thinking.
I think it's gonna end up under finance or,
So,
I don't know how you, I don't think it'll end up being separate.
Lucy, I don't know if you remember that one of the presentations suggested that you have 2 ways of going about this. One is to talk about the education structure, and the other is finance. And if you do one before you do the other, you may be wasting a lot of time. So the recommendation was to address the financial piece of whether or not it makes financial sense for these 8 towns and the 2 districts, because you can exert a lot of energy into creating the perfect educational model and then decide that financially it doesn't make any sense. I'm just throwing that out there. That's what the consultant had
Yeah.
recommended.
And I agree with that, but I don't see any reason why the subcommittees can't be doing this initial work at the same time, and thinking about these issues at the same time. We're not gonna be making any decisions until the financial piece is analyzed and addressed, but I think it makes sense to get these subcommittees constituted and people start brainstorming and gathering information and research in all of these areas, or else it's gonna take us forever. I mean, we're already talking about a 2 to 3 year timeline. I think we should get going on the work that we know is gonna have to be done right away.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Keep on throwing my hand up.
Yeah, so-
So I think maybe Eden raises a really good point of like, people can really inject their own biases, where people are coming from. I almost think that the subcommittees should be looking at like maybe at least 3 scenarios of, like similar to what the Education Task Force did, where they were looking at 5 scenarios. And you gotta kind of do the work objectively, removing one's bias so that we can then come up and then discuss the wide array of data. But if we were gonna stop conversations about the vision of education, just because we're limited on finances or vice versa, you're gonna lose audiences at large in the community, and I can see this thing failing. So
Good point.
we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you,
For me,
Jen.
the focus really has to be on what do we want for our kids and what do we want for our communities. Yes, is it fiscally possible is a really critical question, but if we don't know what it is, it's really hard to determine if it's fiscally possible.
Mhm.
So I think that doing it simultaneously where the people who are looking at the fiscal piece are looking at a variety of possibilities, and the group that's looking at the educational goals is looking at a variety of possibilities, but we need to know what it is, where we want to end up. If we don't know where we want to end up for our kids and for our communities,
What's the point?
then we can create financial models forever of this works, this doesn't work, but does it get us where we want to go? So I think we really need to, whether it's in subcommittee, and ultimately it's in the larger committee, that we need, I think, some consensus of where we want to be.
And that's a great topic for a facilitator.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
may or
I-
may not agree on how to get there.
No,
But
I
we
want
need
to,
to-
Go ahead.
the "we" is bothering me, because this outreach idea is very important, because I'm not at all sure we represent the big "we" that we serve. So this idea of focus groups in our community, we haven't had any listening sessions whatsoever about, except little murmurs and, chats in Big Y or something, oh, blah, blah, this is happening, and I think we right now have to start listening to what the people we represent are thinking, and we have nothing to tell them substantially, but we don't know if we represent what they think, and we don't wanna find out when it goes to town meeting that we got it wrong.
But let me just pose a question
Sure.
in response to that. What people think about a possible consolidation has to be informed, right?
Yeah.
And so before we start having outreach and hearing what people have to say about it, it seems to me it's our job to educate. And we have to start by educating ourselves, and we do that work in the subcommittees and then bringing it to the full committee. And then, once we're educated, not with a recommendation, but at least informed, then it seems to me we start getting the information out and then listening. But to just go out into the community before we've done the work, and before we have answers, and before there's any leadership on these topics, I think would be a mistake, because I think it would be uninformed reaction as opposed to informed opinion.
Well, I respectfully disagree. I would like to just sit in a room and see how people feel about the district and their children's experience, because that's gonna tell me some things that I don't know. But I understand as a formal group if we don't wanna go out, but I hope I won't be criticized if we decide we wanna call together our families, our community members, just to see where they are right now, because I don't know.
I'm wondering if there's a way that we can accomplish all of this, but just phase it, because I think the committees that we form initially speak to the values we place in the process. And I think, to Jane's point, I think the extent to which we can signal from day one that we're going to be looking for community input, as we think about the collective vision, and we think about just all the opportunities and implications of thinking about this collectively, I think we'll go a long way, that that we're signaling that there's gonna be lots of room for community input. When we activate that, though, I think can be determined when we are informed enough to go out and do that outreach. And so we know the right questions to ask that's going to get the information that's going to inform our consideration of the different paths forward and what are the benefits and trade-offs to those. And so we think about that from the start, but we think intentionally about the timeline and when we do certain things at what points of the process.
So that's where the outreach committee might be working on structuring that, that's all.
So let's put the outreach committee on this list,
Yes.
I
right?
think it's-
From
That's a
the,
worthy thing to consider.
yeah. Yes, sir.
Just in summary, I think the hard work here is that you have to look at both tracks. The financial implications and the educational implications, because some of us who were in the previous committee heard a presentation saying, don't expect any savings out of this. And I know that within Egremont, there have been informal discussions which are saying, okay, if this is gonna fly, it has to be a strong case. And it needs to be a case that people will buy into. And many of us don't have a dog in this fight. We're just looking to do what's correct. And there are at least two other people at this table who can appreciate the old adage, in God we trust, all others bring data. And so that's where it starts for somebody like me. But I do believe that you have to have both tracks, because I know just scratching here and there are elected officials and citizens who are quite skeptical if there's no big prize at the end. And if the prize is quality education, which is better and bigger, and that needs to be sold, because there's a very good chance, there's an equal chance that it's gonna be a little more expensive as there is a chance to be less expensive. And hopefully that's not gonna be the only thing that makes the determination. We heard one presentation that that's where it fell apart for one of the groups that was thinking about consolidating. And then we heard just today from Jake that they bailed on the full picture because it became way too complicated and focused instead on education. So there's value in all those things, but I think the hard work of this group is gotta be you have both tracks, so that you can, in the end, make the sale, because that's what it's gonna have to be.
Yeah, John?
See, I don't wanna throw a wrench in the works, but I think I wanna ask a question for clarification. When our grant, does it specifically ask whether or not is a complete regionalization, or a partial regionalization, or a stage regionalization, or nothing else, nothing specific?
I'll look at the language, but I think it was just like
Nothing specific.
explore possibilities.
Yeah,
Okay.
I brought a copy of
Great,
it.
okay, so it's general enough that we're not
Yeah.
tied to anything, okay, so.
Yeah, 'cause when he kept.
Following on that, my real question is, and considering the time constraints, I'm going to guess that there is a big difference between gathering data between, let's say, a full regionalization and a high school regionalization, or phasing one before the other. So if we need to spend this money by June 30th, and we're looking for consultants, I think we need at least to define what we're going to do. Are we going to go for full regionalization? Questions surrounding full regionalization? Are we gonna phase them in? Are we gonna go just for the high school first? Because that determines everything else.
But I think we don't know. We have,
But, okay, but if we don't know, then we're asking for everything. That's my point. If we're asking for everything, then we need to be intentional about that and realize how that affects our time constraints.
Yeah, I mean, what I said, when he kept saying, sell this, we don't know what this is. Yeah, we don't know what this is yet.
And I would argue that it's in our collective interest to leave it open-ended. That'll
That's fine.
make it more complicated,
Right.
but we might end up with we do all this analysis, we have advantages and disadvantages in all these different areas, and we end up with some hybrid model where we take some of each. I think if we paint ourselves into a corner on one narrowly defined approach, that could likely blow.
Yeah, I didn't wanna do that, I just wanted to make sure that we understood what we are doing. And we're-
And I thought we understood that if once we hire the consultant and encumber the money that goes to that person, it doesn't matter if the contract goes through August or something, because the money's already been spent when you sign the contract. Is that what you said?
Actually, I think it's what Mr. Burkle said, is that once you enter
I
into
mean,
a contract,
If you have a letter
it's-
of commitment,
Yes.
your funds are
Yeah, so we don't actually have to have all the work done by the
No, we'll
30th.
just have to, we'll have to write though to them and say, we're, you know,
This is where we are.
this is where we are, and this is how we expect to spend the rest of it over the
Yeah, we
next
have it
6 weeks.
accounted for.
We do have to expend it though by the 30th unless we ask for an extension.
right.
Yeah.
I think, what, tomorrow we should, Monday we should ask for an extension.
I don't think they'll be surprised.
Okay, so,
Say we had our first meeting.
this is what I propose on item 6. I will circulate a list of possible subcommittees. Everyone should think about which ones they might want to serve on, whether they think the list is complete and the best list. And then in our next meeting, we'll officially form our subcommittees and everyone will join the committee or committees that they want to be on. I would really encourage everyone to be on at least one, and maybe more than one, depending on their schedules. But I think that's the way to keep everyone engaged. Yes, Jen?
Do you think it's a good idea for like the town, the bodies, like, or like the representatives from each of the towns, maybe even discuss amongst themselves about maybe distributing so there's representation from towns on all the
Yeah, that would be great if we can accomplish that. I wouldn't want to make it an absolute test requirement, but yes, to the extent we can get people from each of the towns on each of the committees, that would be great. Okay, I think I have everybody's email. Nadine sent it around, I hope it's accurate.
I did bring a blank one, thinking that if there was additional information, well, it's not blank, but if you wanted to add a phone number or correct an email address, so we might get that.
Just a question about meeting norms.
About what?
Norms.
Norms.
For example, simple things, always bring a calendar, cell phones on vibrate. Are we gonna have a list of meeting norms? Try to keep the meeting to maybe a given day, a given time, avoid weekends, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that with meeting schedule, that's a great segue for me. I know when Nadine sent around today's date, my face lit up because weekends are wonderful for me, because my weekdays are very challenged, especially if I have to be in court, but others had an allergic reaction to it.
Yes, they certainly did.
And didn't like weekends at all. So, what I thought I'd do in terms of scheduling the next meeting would be to circulate a doodle. Does everyone know how to use those? I think that's the most efficient way to get a date that works for everyone, but I do think as a group, we should talk today about weekends versus weekdays. As I said, weekdays are more challenging for me. I will make it work to the extent I can, but if I'm called into court on a date that's scheduled, you know, at 5 o'clock, I won't be able to do it, and Peter will have to chair the meeting. So with that in mind, why don't we just sort of poll the room as to whether it would have to be evenings,
More challenging.
which are challenging for
More
people who are on
challenging
boards.
this time of the year.
Right, very challenging for people on boards. But let's just poll the room on weekends versus weekday evenings. So you've heard mine, weekends are better for me.
Weekday evenings.
Someone keeping track?
I'm
of this
doing it.
voting? Okay. Bonnie? Or you can
say
be
either.
agnostic.
Either.
Okay, either.
Weekday evenings.
Weekday evenings.
Weekday evenings.
Weekday evenings.
Weekday evenings.
happens, but not during budget season.
We're almost done, right?
Weekday evenings.
Weekday evenings.
Do we even need to finish?
I think we're done. Okay, so
Weekday evenings it is.
weekday evenings, I'll be circulating doodles for our next meeting. I do think we should try and do it within a couple of weeks, right? So I'll send out a doodle that has some for late next week and days for the following week. And if everyone could respond as quickly as possible, then we can get a date circulated.
I'm just speaking for myself. It might be helpful to also plan not just from meeting to meeting, but maybe get a couple dates on the calendars for
Good idea.
subsequent.
Yeah.
So I can just communicate with them.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And location,
Does this work for
Here's
everyone?
good.
I like this one.
If this works, we can make this available. A couple of people like to take the stairs, and on a Saturday, I didn't have time to unlock every single door. So plan going up on the elevator, but if it ends up being a weekday evening, the doors will likely be unlocked and you can't take the stairs.
Okay, so 2-hour meetings max?
Yes.
Does that sound right? I think cell phones should be off, but people should be able to bring their cell phones. That's how people take notes and look at their calendars and things. Other norms that people wanna talk about? Yes?
I think we should only be recognized through the chair, so that we're not having cross conversations or agree that we're gonna have free form, but it's one or the other.
Yeah, I think with this size group, we need the chair to recognize folks. Yes, Jeff?
We also get placards with the names and the town that they're from, just so we can start getting to know each other. Or name. Just so we can start.
You know what we can do? We can make little paper ones and bring them with us, right?
Budget
We
neutral.
have to make our own.
Budget neutral.
I'll volunteer to pick up the already paper ones that fold. You write your own name and some name tags.
Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
go.
And what about food for evening meetings?
You're bringing Pizza Jane.
No, I just think, thinking on an empty stomach at the end of the day is not the greatest, so, and a lot of people don't have a chance to grab something.
I think that's one thing we organize.
Well, I mean, if people feel it's important.
Oh, bring it.
Bring
I mean,
something.
if you wanna bring your sandwich, you
People
need.
can bring their own food.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's better.
That's much better.
Yeah, Peter?
Since I sense that we're ending the meeting, I just wanna thank you, Lucy, for
Yes.
being
Yes.
chair.
Thank you. I have one more disclaimer, which some of you may have noticed during the meeting today. My hearing is terrible. And so I really need to ask all of you to speak up if you could, because if I'm missing stuff, that's why, and I apologize. But that's my disclaimer.
One final note, could those of us who are gonna be on this selection thing caucus for a few seconds to figure out when we can make that?
Yeah, sure.
Oh,
I didn't hear.
that was about
Yeah.
the
Well, why don't we meet down?
facilitator.
We'll
This-
meet down
We
here.
could go, there's a little
The
kitchen over there.
subcommittee
above the
that you
kitchen.
assigned, Lucy, is gonna meet first.
Yeah.
So that would be Peter, Jane, Bonnie, Roger, Susan, Peter Dillon,
Mr. Berkeley.
Tom.
So
Okay, are we adjourned?
Are we adjourned?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.